Thank you. Thank you so much for the very generous introduction. And I will agree that clicking the record button is harder than it seems. The number of times on that task and I forget to click the button in time, I have many, many, many half recordings in my Zoom room. But anyways, I'm very excited to be here. I'm very thankful for the invitation to be able to present this work with this amazing team of co-authors. Synthetic contact with AI reduces cross-partisan animosity. I'm very excited to hear your feedbacks and questions on this because this is work in progress. We're in the process of submitting this. So your questions and comments are going to be very, very helpful. In case anybody needs to leave super early, here's the TLDR version. People are really averse to talk to outgroups. People don't want to talk to people from the other side of the political aisle, but they're more likely, more open to talk to a bot from the other side. And when they do, they correct misperceptions about the outgroup and they become warmer towards them. They also become more likely to talk to a real human in a real incentivized, incentive-compatible behavioral study. And the effect is detectable a week later. Even though the size of the effect is reduced, a conversation as short as 5 or 10 minutes leaves a small residual effect on warmth a week later. Finally, we have some preliminary evidence that the mechanism is more informational. It's more about what is being talked about than relational. I'm going to see that's very different from the way human intergroup contact works. Okay, so here's the roadmap for today. I'm going to start with a little bit of motivation for why this matters and what's some of the work done in this space before. And then I'm going to address a series of questions that hopefully will establish the usefulness of synthetic contact. The first is, will people talk to a bot? Because if they're not going to talk, there's no benefit to be had. Does talking to the bot correct misperceptions? Does warmth change causally? Does behavior change? Does the effect last? And why does it work? So I don't need to say too much about this in the sense that in the course of the last 20 to 30 years, there's been growing animosity and divergence between the left and the right. I'm taking a US viewpoint here, but I think this is global. I think it's particularly bad in the US. But conservatives and liberals have a harder and harder time finding spaces of agreement and collaborating with each other. Now, the solution to this sort of problem of animosity between groups has been studied since the 50s. This is Gordon Allport. He wrote this book, The Nature of Prejudice, and proposes this idea of intergroup contact, right? If only people who don't understand or don't like each other would talk to each other, they would get in the same room and share a human experience, then we could solve this problem of intergroup animosity, right? And in his time, the biggest sort of concern he had was that of racial relationships, especially between African Americans and Caucasians. But of course, now perhaps the biggest split in American society, at least, is political. So how has intergroup contact been applied in politics? There's this wonderful paper published in Science Advances by my colleague, Eric Santoro, that shows basically that when you get people, Democrats and Republicans, to have a face-to-face conversation where they talk about what they think a perfect day is for them, they become warmer towards the outgroup. Now, notably, he finds that these effects don't last. Right? So when he follows up on people, people go back to baseline. Now, interestingly, when people have a political discussion rather than just talking about shared experiences, he doesn't see this effect. Right? I'm calling attention to this because this is going to be something that's going to be different between human intergroup contact and AI intergroup contact, or synthetic intergroup contact, I should say. Now, of course, all of this would be well and dandy if the Democrats and Republicans would get in a room together and would talk, but of course they don't, right? And now there's a growing concern that people don't go out in the real world, people are online. So what about contact online? What about having Democrats and Republicans talk to each other online. The problem is that that often backfires. There's a paper published in PNAS. It shows that when you pay people to be exposed to outside views on Twitter, they don't become more depolarized. And if anything, they can get even more politically polarized. So there's some things that are very different about sort of like in-person intergroup contact versus exposure online, the non-physicality of it, the lack of physical cues, the lack of real-time interaction, for example, that suggests why online contact might not work, right? As I alluded to earlier, the bigger problem is that people really don't want to talk to each other, right? I'm referencing here this paper, 2018, that what they did is they used cell phone location data to measure the duration of Thanksgiving dinners when the members of the dinner were cross-party, right? Relative to a single-party Thanksgiving dinner, cross-party dinners ended between half an hour to an hour earlier. Right? That results in like 34 million hours of foregone intergroup contact in the US that year. So here's the solution we propose. We propose synthetic contact. We find synthetic contact as an interaction with an AI that acts as a stand-in for a member of a social outgroup. And that can counter stereotypes and reduce animosity. Why might synthetic contact work? There's a couple of reasons. First is there's this framework, computers as social actors, that suggests that people tend to ascribe humanity to machines. Even like really low-level software people talk about in terms of human behavior. But specifically for AI, people anthropomorphize AI. And AI might be really good at simulating the key ingredients of contact, right? That is individuation, so talking to an individual rather than reading an abstract idea, being able to exchange information and being able to take the perspective of the other side. Now, why might synthetic contact, on the other hand, fail? Volker and I were just talking about this problem of sycophancy. Models are notoriously sycophantic. So there's this worry, of course, that if you are a Democrat talking to a Republican AI and you say all Republicans are evil, the AI bot will just agree with you. They'll say, you're absolutely right. That's a truly insightful opinion about Republicans. Right? So that's a real risk. The second one is that AI itself might be biased, right? And here's this paper that shows that that's the case, that there's sort of like hidden biases in the AI models. So if the AI is not a faithful representation of the outgroup, has a biased perception of the outgroup, then it might backfire. So now let's get at the data. I'm going to start with this first study on aversion and acceptance. Here's what we did. We had people try out this short mortality reflection, right? So here's an aversive task that you don't want to do. We're going to ask people to make a choice between either do this mortality reflection task for a certain amount of time or talk to an outgroup for a certain amount of time. And so we gave them a test of what the mortality reflection task would be like, and then we had them do these pairwise choices. What would you rather do? Would you talk to a Republican if you're a Democrat for 3 minutes, or would you do 10 minutes of this mortality reflection exercise? Right? If you clicked, I would rather talk to a Republican, then the mortality reflection time would go down, right? To make it more attractive. So after a couple of choices, when the choice reverses, we get the exchange rate, right? How many minutes of mortality reflection is the exchange rate for 3 minutes of talking to a Republican? And between subjects, we randomize people to be a human Republican or an AI Republican, a human Democrat or an AI Democrat in the case of the other party. Now, what happens when we do this task and we ask people to make these choices? By the way, this is incentive compatible. So whatever they chose after the selection process was done, they had to actually do. So they had to go forward with their choice. And what we get is that AI has the aversion to outgroup contact. Right? So 3 minutes of chat is equivalent to 9, almost 10 minutes of mortality reflection when the interlocutor is a human, but it's roughly half as aversive when the interlocutor is an AI. So that's the first sort of important thing. Synthetic contact is more likely to get people in through the door and makes it more likely that people will actually have a conversation with some member of the outgroup, even if it's a digital member of the outgroup. Now we look at whether beliefs change, right? And I'm going to start by showing you a little bit of the paradigm that we run for the following studies. They're all variations of this. So here, for example, we tell people they are exploring product market fit for domestic appliances. And we ask them to rate their political orientation. Before they begin, we ask them how cold or warm they feel towards Republicans and Democrats. Then we ask them to guess the out party's perception on these environmental concern items. We ask them their own and that of their party, right? So these are 6 items that measure environmental concern, environmentally minded consumption. So we get what they think their party thinks, and what they think the outgroup thinks. Then we randomize people to condition. So you might get this. Can you still see my screen? Perfect. My screen just turned off for whatever reason. Okay. So they're randomized, right? So either they get this intro to the bot screen where they know they're talking to a bot, and they know that the bot has been prompted to represent the outgroup. In this case, it's 10-minute conversation, but we have other versions of the study where we do 5. So they go and have the conversation. This is like a real screenshot from a conversation. Person asks what's their political orientation, what they think about environmental stuff, and so on, right? So when people have this conversation, what happens? In another condition, we tell people, hey, play this Space Invaders game, right? So they just play a game for 10 minutes. In another condition, they chat about cats and dogs. Now, after they return from the chat or the game, we ask them to try to guess, now that they've learned a little bit more, guess again, what is the average Republican for these environmental items? And how warm or cold do you feel towards the outgroup? The first thing that we find is that people really severely misperceive each other, right? So here, you can see what Democrats think of Republicans. They think that they really don't care much about the environment at all, but real Republicans are here, right? So this is a huge difference between the reality and the perception. There's a huge perception gap, especially for Democrats thinking about Republicans. And there's another also misperception gap for the other party, but not as large as there is for Democrats thinking about Republicans in this environmental case. Now, something that's interesting here is where the bot stands. So the Republican bot is actually a more extreme version of what the Republicans actually are, right? So the real Republicans are almost at a 4 of environmental concern. They're pro-environment. The Republican bot is actually more neutral, right? So the Republican bot is more opposed to the environment than real Republicans. The Democrat bot is more pro-environment than real Republicans. So this thing I alluded to in the beginning, that the bot might be biased, is actually something that we see here, where the bots are sort of like more extreme versions of the parties they represent. The Republican bot hates the environment more than real Republicans. The Democrat bot is more green than the actual Democrats. So what happens when they talk? They start with these really biased perceptions of what the other group is like. After they talk, they become more accurate about these environmental beliefs of the outgroup. And the other thing that happens is that they become warmer. Right? In all of these studies, the immediate effect is roughly equivalent to reversing 10 years of the growing animosity trend. Right? So it takes you back 10 years, reverses 10 years of growing animosity. Now, how causal is this? We're going to run an experiment to find out. This is the experiment with 3 conditions. And what we get is that when you compare against two conditions, one ruling out just pro-sociality, one ruling out pure engagement, um, we see that people who talk to the bot end up warmer than both of these other groups. We see that it works even for the most extreme partisans, right? So there's no interaction, no significant interaction between political extremity and the gains in warmth, right? So even the most extreme participants, people who say, I identify as a Republican on a scale of 0 to 100 at a 90 or 100, it still works for them just as effectively as it works for people who are more moderate. Now, does this last? We collected a new sample, and 1 week later, we recontact them. We don't give them a reminder of who we are or what they did last week. We just tell them this is a really short one-question task on Prolific that we're going to ask you to do. And the single task is to answer how warm do you feel towards the outgroup. And what we find is that this is pooled data from two samples. What we find is that a week later, we still see a significant effect for all participants. The effect is almost around 20% of the original size. So it becomes smaller. But this was after a 5 to 10 minute conversation, right? So an interaction as brief as that has a measurable impact a week later. And if you look at the subset of participants who are higher extremity, they actually have a larger effect at 1 week later, right? So this is really driven by the people who are more extreme at baseline, who a week later, they still have some residual warmth. Basically, they think my views were perhaps too extreme, and I was wrong in being so strongly against this group. So it's likely driven by the higher extremity participants. Now, does it change behavior? A lot of the research on intergroup contact focuses just on what people feel, what people say, what are people's attitudes. But changing behavior is much harder, right? So we collected a new sample of participants, and we test whether it's going to change their behavior. In this case, they're talking about immigration as opposed to environmental policy. And they complete the same procedure as before. They either talk to the synthetic contact bot or they talk about cats and dogs. And then for the final part of the study, they have to complete one more task. They have to choose what to do. They're either going to talk to a real human from the other side for 3 minutes, or they're going to complete this mortality reflection. And then whatever they chose, they're going to complete, right? So this is a screenshot from the mortality reflection thing. After you input your date of birth, it tells you that life is about 4,000 weeks. This is based on my date of birth. I've lived roughly through 1,800 of my weeks. I have 2,300 left. So how does that make me feel? Not very well, if I say so myself. So some people chose that. Other people chose to actually have a conversation with a real human partner, right? And so the way this worked is that for this study, we recruited both Democrats and Republicans who were completing the study at the same time. So whenever they finished, people who chose to talk to an outgroup would be paired. They would be paired with each other, right? So they had these real conversations with members of the outgroup. So what we see is that synthetic contact doesn't just move attitudes, it moves behavior, right? It makes it more likely that people are going to go through the door and have a real interaction with a real human. For the overall effect, it's 7 percentage points. It's not significant for Democrats, but it's 4 percentage points, might be significant in a larger sample, and 10 percentage points for Republicans, right? So in this case, Republicans have a stronger effect. In the environmental studies, the Democrats had a stronger effect. So of course, what the content of the conversation is might matter for who gets the larger correction and therefore who gets the larger effects. So people were not just changing how they felt or how they thought or what they would say about outgroups, but they would also change their behavior in a meaningful, incentive-compatible way. Now, what about the mechanism? why do we think this happens? And we have evidence that what is likely driving these effects is stereotype disconfirming evidence. So we coded each of the conversational turns in the thousands of conversations that we've collected across the studies, and we rate them for how often are the bot's turns providing stereotype disconfirming information. And we see that basically this is what's driving the findings. This is different from, if you recall, how human intergroup contact works, where the mechanism seems to be more relational than informational. Right here, we have people and bots talking about the issues themselves. They are talking about immigration. They are talking about environmental policy. When the humans actually talk with humans about these topics, they don't see an effect. Right? And what we think is happening is that the sort of like being able to talk to an AI lowers all of the costs of needing to save face, of dealing with the awkwardness of the conversation, of potential conflict arising and derailing the conversation. None of that happens with AI. So that allows people, when they talk to AI, to be able to workshop these sensitive issues in ways that don't really work or they can't really do as effectively when they're talking to a human. We don't see anything about the specificity of the information and the effects on how warm or friendly or empathic the conversation is was just inconsistent. So in some studies, the cats and dogs bot was more empathetic and more friendly. In others, the synthetic contact bot was. In others, there was no difference. So there's no consistent evidence that it's the sort of like friendliness and relational aspect that is really driving the effect, but rather being able to talk about these sensitive issues that otherwise people would be unable to talk about. So what's the take home? First, synthetic contact reduces the barrier to entry, right? We saw people really don't want to talk to the outgroup. They're willing to forgo money in some studies to avoid being exposed to the other side. So when the interlocutor is AI as opposed to a real human, the conversation is more easy, right? More attractive, and therefore people are almost twice as likely to accept talking to an AI bot rather than talking to an actual human. Then when they have this conversation with the bot, it corrects inaccurate beliefs that partisans hold. They are very biased about what the other side actually thinks. And it also boosts warmth towards the outgroup. So after having this conversation with the bot, people leave thinking, actually, this Republicans or Democrats are not so different from me after all. Even though the bot was a bit more extreme than the actual participants, people leave thinking, actually, I was biased, and maybe I don't have enough reason to be as cold to the outgroup as I was. Then we find that synthetic contact can on-ramp into real behavior. So not just people changing what they believe or what they think or what their attitudes are, but really take a costly behavioral choice that shows evidence that they've really sort of like significantly importantly changed. And despite the shortness of the intervention, these are just 5 to 10-minute conversations, we still have effects that are measurable a week later. Finally, we find some evidence that contrary to how intergroup contact works in humans for political issues, the mechanism is more informational rather than relational. That talking to the bot allows people to go into topics that otherwise they wouldn't be able to. And in doing so, correct misperceptions and become more mature to the outgroup. So that's it. In conclusion, synthetic contact is a promising way of addressing this growing problem of cross-partisan animosity that perhaps might be deployed at scale, at low cost, might be able to reach people who would otherwise not talk to any other person from the other side. So thank you.